jump in and get going. So thank you very much. Really good to see everybody on the session this afternoon, this evening, or this morning, depending on where you are. I don't want to sort of dwell too much on the background to this, but cloud computing is something that's been around for a number of years, and I think we're all familiar with a lot of the changes that it's brought to our ways of working. But what I really want to do in this session is highlight some opportunities for you, your clients, and really for the wider economy as well, especially with what we've been through this year. But I think that there's an underlying trend that's been going on for a number of years, and I think there's a huge opportunity that is yet to be properly exploited. And I think everyone here, certainly everyone in our network, is placed really, really well to take advantage of that opportunity. So I want to share some of the thinking around that with you today, and then we'll go into the roundtable and explore some of these concepts a bit further, and then open up the questions to the wider group. But this all started, or this session certainly started with again the big thing that happened this year, the pandemic, how it's changed so much of our lives and the way we work. And again, many of you will know we have a very diverse network in terms of our partners and customers that we work with. Everyone from, businesses using Skore to do process improvement internally, to consulting business and technology providers. And obviously, in the early days of the pandemic, we spent a lot of time talking to everyone to try and get their angle and feedback on what does this mean for us. What does it mean for our businesses, our families, and so on. And I've just picked out two here, but I started to see this pattern of conversations that were happening. We've worked with a lot of consultants from sort of mid-sized, small, mid-sized and larger consultancies, freelance analysts, and so on. And I started to hear these stories. A lot of larger businesses put on hold very, very quickly, major change and transformation programs, with people often given hours or days notice that, hey, the contract that you thought was going to be 6-12 months is, we're going to pause it for now, and we're not sure when this is going to come back online. Now, of course, at the same time, we've got a lot of small to medium-sized businesses who also massively impacted by this, and unfortunately, a lot of those have been so badly impacted that didn't survive. But there was a big rush for people to kind of move online and take advantage of some of these technologies that we have available. And I love this first quote. And I remember this was very early in April, this person telling me that the next door neighbor ran a shop selling hair extensions. And her initial reaction was, well, there's no way, if I've got no customers, because my customers aren't allowed to come to the shop, there's no way that I can afford to pay the rent. I might as well just give up. I'm going to close the business down and see what happens. And he said, no, what we can do is we can take this online and we can set you up with e-commerce. It's quite easy to do. All we've got to do is sit down and think through all of the steps. What are the things we need to do? We've got to put a structure around it. And I just thought that was fascinating, because these SMEs are struggling not just with that, but also how do we work remotely effectively and so on. And these are challenges that larger businesses are dealing with, but that we're often involved in helping them make those decisions and helping them get those sorts of projects over the line. So started to see this opportunity that a lot of SMEs are going to be driving the economy through the pandemic and into the new year. Everyone's going to be involved in driving the economy, but there is a sort of almost underrepresented opportunity there. And so some of these consultants I was talking to said, well, this is a different way for me working. I'm not familiar with dealing with small to medium-sized businesses. I don't know how to engage with them, and I don't know what sort of commercial model might work. So cloud has been changing the world of work for many years, but this year it's had a massive boost, and not everybody was kind of ready for it, and or even now are still sort of struggling to keep up. But I just want to take a bit of a step back before I go into this a bit further and tell a little bit of a story about my background and history, my career, and how that's been shaped by cloud. I was born in the 1970s, so I started work in the 1990s, and I was actually very fortunate that one of the first companies I worked for was a startup that was doing that was building centralized systems to deliver software through web browsers. So not dissimilar to what we were doing. But it wasn't long before I was moved on and working with more traditional businesses. And the problem with the traditional software business in those days was, even when you were selling to a small to medium-sized business, was a long sales process to agree a considerable capital outlay for the licenses. But even if you could agree on the licenses, there was still then this problem of, okay, we've got to go and buy a server. We've got to buy software licenses for the server. Somebody's got to physically travel to the location. And I have to say, even as late as 2007, 2008, I found myself sat in server rooms with a CD installing software for clients. And then, of course, and when I looked this up, I couldn't believe actually how long ago this was. But in 2000, Salesforce launched at the very beginning of 2000, their cloud-based CRM. Right from the beginning, it was about cloud-based, and their famous no software campaign, which was brilliant, because it created this whole sort of pushback of, hey, it's still software, it's just software in the cloud, and Mark Benioff going, well, duh, that's the point, right? But they came out competing directly against Oracle and Siebel, the big enterprise software businesses. But their offering was, hey, you're going to get great quality software that I can deliver to you anywhere you want at a price that you can afford, which opened up a much bigger part of the market. And to me, yeah, they weren't the first, but they changed the conversation, right? They changed the narrative around cloud. And so that's always been a big part of, for me, the cloud story. But ultimately, what the cloud gave us was it just gave, and as the years have passed, it's giving everybody access to what was traditionally enterprise level tools, and given us flexibility, all businesses of all sizes, to be able to work much more flexibly and much more in the way that we want to. And this is the same for Skore, right? Our vision was about taking high-end process improvement and to some extent business architecture tooling, and trying to make that available to a much wider audience so they can take advantages, of the opportunities that this sort of thing, this technology brings us. It's brilliant. The future is rosy, except it's quite complicated. And a very, very quick scan of capterra.com to look at what sort of technologies are available, cloud technologies are available to small to medium-sized businesses. CRMs listed on Capterra, and of course this isn't an exhaustive list, cloud-based CRMs are 677. 498 marketing automation platforms, 424 enterprise resource planning softwares available, and 276 cloud accounting platforms. Many of these systems, there is some crossover between these, of course, but many of these systems are highly configurable and highly flexible, which means that taking them on and adopting them themselves is quite complex. But if we just looked at the cloud accounting space, and I pick on the New Zealand-based Xero application, they have their own marketplace of apps that integrate into that platform, and that in itself is over 800. So it just gives you a sense of some of the complexity that we have here. And we've made all these gains around costs and the reliance on IT support, and we've got much better and easier to use software. But at the same time, it's making businesses more complex because of the opportunities to adopt these types of technologies is much more readily available. That's part of the opportunity that I want that we can exploit here. But I want to give you a sense of the size of the prize, for want of a better term. There's a big market out there, and I've got data here that is purely based on the United Kingdom. Of course, you could extrapolate this data to Western Europe, North America, Australia, and other economies around the world, just to get a sense of what we're talking about. So within the UK, when we talk about small to medium-sized businesses or enterprises, we're typically talking about businesses of less than 250 people. of which there are 5.8 million in the UK. These are 2019 figures, so it might be slightly different now. But actually, when you look at historical data, there's been a general trend of these size businesses growing. Those businesses make up 50% of the UK business turnover. And again, just to give you a sense of what that is, we're talking about £2 trillion British pound, over 2 trillion British pounds per year in turnover, just in the small to medium size enterprise space. And also importantly, and especially given the light of what's been happening this year, that makes up 60% of the UK workforce. And again, to put that into perspective, we're talking about a total workforce of nearly 30 million people, so 60% of that workforce. So it's sizable, it's massive, the size of the market that we're dealing with. Now, the beginning, in this summer, I was lucky enough to be invited to take part in a program run by the Plymouth City Council, which was about helping small to medium-sized businesses scale up. And the program had been put together following some research that had been carried out by a group of local enterprise partnerships across the south and southwest of the UK. And there were some really, really interesting insights that came out in terms of how SMEs saw how they grew their businesses. So of all of the businesses that were surveyed, 70% of them said that they intended to grow their business next year, in the next 12 months. So a majority of businesses are looking to grow. Of that 70%, 50% of those businesses found it very difficult to find the right skills required to be able to grow their business. So some of the skills they talked about was knowledge of growing a business, but there's some other key skills which we'll touch on a bit later on. But again, clearly a skills gap or access to skills. Now, this one was really interesting because less than a third of those businesses had, that's the 70% intending to grow, less than a third of them have used any sort of outside consulting or advisory support in their businesses. Now, in brackets, I just say they called out that this didn't include legal and financial. And by financial, that broke down into accountants and your bank, i.e. asking your bank for advice on funding, for example. So that's anything that sits outside of that. Accounting was very much seen as traditional tax compliance and tax filing. Now, of that 28% that had used consulting and advisory, they explored what sort of support that those businesses used and what they preferred. And the most popular approach was some sort of ongoing model that wasn't, didn't require some sort of huge capital outlay for them to do. It wasn't let's take a big project and fix some sort of problem in the business and then, that's that done and we forget about it. What they liked and what they cited often was coaching and mentoring, where you might be paying some sort of retainer over a period of time and you're dipping in and out of that advice and support as and when you needed it. Now, for me, one of the most interesting things that came out of the research is this last point, and that is these businesses were given 8 points or requirements that they thought that they saw as important to being able to grow their business. And then they were asked us to mark those in terms of the level of importance. And the requirement that came out at the top was these businesses saw the key to growing their business was they needed help with processes and systems to improve efficiency. Now, again, a little bit of maybe not context, but just to give you a sense of what the other top requirements that came out of this. So the other one that was really joint top with this one was help accessing large enterprises and government as a customer. So that's a big one, is as a small business trying to get into large businesses. And then kind of much further back from that was help accessing high growth mentors. So people who have experience in this space and have grown a business like this before, how do we get access to people like that? And then fourth on the list was actually access to financing. So I think that's really interesting, right? There's clearly there's a skills gap there in terms of what the help that people need in terms of their processes and systems and improving their efficiency. There's a preference for some sort of ongoing regular help that they can dip in and out of, some sort of predictable costs that go around that. But obviously they're one of the biggest drivers is driving efficiencies through better processes and systems, and they're seeing that as key to growth. So I think it's really interesting in terms of some of the trends and patterns that we're seeing and the feedback we're getting from our network of partners and customers that we're working with, and how Skore fits into that. And we're seeing a lot of that happening. We're seeing different people at different points on a bit of a journey here. So there's many of you here in the session today that are already using Skore to help deliver technology projects, going into a business and really helping understand that business quickly, helping that business articulate its pain so you can offer a solution. And one of the things that Skore does is it helps to accelerate that process, helps to accelerate the act of performing that analysis on the business, within the business, because it helps to automate some parts of it. But the interesting trend that we've started to see is how many of you are looking at that and going, okay, well, that's great. We go and deliver a piece of technology to a client, and the clients love it. They love the experience of helping them understand their business better. We implement the technology. But what starts to happen almost immediately from once that technology goes live is that business starts to change, the market changes, the customer changes, and the process starts to diverge over time from the technology. And if that's not kept in check and well understood, what starts to happen is the technology isn't always doing what the business needs it to do. People start to find workarounds. You'll start to see an increase in support cases and saying, well, it's not working the way we thought it was going to work. And if you're not careful, that diverges so far that when they come to renew that system, they look at it and go, well, it didn't really work the way we wanted it, so we'll go with a different vendor or a different supplier. And what many of you have started to do, and we've been having many conversations around this, is starting to introduce the concept of, okay, we do that capture exercise and analysis up front, but we provide that to the client so that at periodic points in time after the implementation, we can come back and run health checks, realignment sessions. We can look at those processes and say, okay, your process has changed, well, we can update the system, keep them realigned. But you also recognize that in doing so, that you're identifying additional opportunities and new ways that you can help the client. And we've just got some cases now where some of you have started to talk about, well, actually, what we're doing is we're helping our customers continually optimize their process. And so it changes the conversation, because what we're now doing is we're going to the client saying, we're not going to help you implement the system. We're going to help you continually find those efficiencies and continually improve your processes and provide you the technology solutions that do that. And I think that's really the opportunity that we're starting to see emerge. And it's quite exciting, because by doing that, you can start to offer a predictable ongoing service to the client. And for want of a better term, an ongoing process optimization service that, again, is predictable. For the client, it's giving them huge amounts of value because you're helping them keep on top of those process growth problems, but it's also helping you grow your business because you're identifying new opportunities and new ways to help that client. So I'm going to leave it at that point. Leave that thought hanging there. We can go into the discussion, and I think I'm going to hand over to Angus.
Thanks, Craig, who has to remember to come off mute, but that was fantastic. Thank you very much. So hello, everybody. I'm Angus Sim. I've been with Skore for about a year now. The last couple of months, really enjoyed setting up our community, which Anna talked about earlier. We all learn new skills and expertise through this lockdown, and that's been one of mine, I have to say. But the thing that I've really enjoyed about it is it's been the opportunity for me to get closer to our clients and actually understand how we can help them succeed, essentially. So how we build our own sort of client success layer on top of our software product, and how that informs things like the product roadmap and everything else. So thoroughly enjoying that. But to get straight on to the conversation, I'd like to, I'll be joined by Lucy Beck and Rowan van Tromp, who Anna kindly introduced earlier. So reminder to keep going with the questions, which is great. I've seen a few already. Craig, you'll be glad to know that some of the most entertaining relate to what year you were born. We might come back to that later. And also thanks to a couple of questions which have come up, which I'm definitely going to come to in the right moment. So first of all, I'm going to ask both of you, Lucy and Rowan, starting with Lucy. Lucy, I see you you thought about joining Salesforce back in 2002. Perhaps you could give us a quick introduction to yourself and your business, and doing so maybe reflect on one of the things that Craig said, which was that, you know, for all of us, 2020 has thrown up all sorts of unexpected sort of hurdles and opportunities.
Okay, so the first thing I want to say, Angus, is evening, everybody, and a big hello to Christopher Thomas and John Stinchcombe. Long time no see, guys. Lovely to see some long-standing business colleagues and acquaintances there. So yes, Angus, I, pre-starting A2Z Cloud, I worked at Hummingbird, and in fact left Hummingbird just as they were taken over by OpenText. So we're going right back to the turn of the century. That makes me feel really old, saying the turn of the century. And I was approached by Salesforce to go and work for them. I'd been using Salesforce a little bit. Hummingbird were just beginning to deploy it, and I wasn't sure that that was what I wanted to do. So I went to join a small company that specialized in scanning at the time called Digital Vision. And while I was there, I got into finance process automation all around the scanning of invoices and the workflow and processing of invoices, and stayed with them for a number of years until they were taken over by Basware and then left. And when I came to set up A2Z Cloud, it was all about doing process automation around invoicing, because everybody thinks big companies don't pay little companies. And whilst doing purchase to pay automation, I realized that little companies don't get paid because they don't know how to invoice. They literally do not know how to invoice. They send out invoices on Excel templates or on Word and stuff like that. And therefore, their invoices were failing when they were submitted to companies like Boots and Tesco's and Dixon's and the like. So I had this high convoluting idea that I would do consulting. But as any of you who are or have just set up your consulting business, I guarantee your business will pivot completely within 12 months of starting up, because I very quickly found myself solving a totally different problem for people. Did that answer your question, Angus, or did I go down a bunny hole?
No, it's great. Thank you very much. We'll give Rowan a chance to introduce himself as well, and then we'll get into we're going to come back to the slide that we've got up on the screen here.
Cool, thanks, Angus. So yeah, my name's Rowan, and I'm an ACCA qualified accountant and operations director of App Advisory Plus. I've been this App Advisory Plus is a pretty new organisation, just over a year old really, and prior to getting involved with them, I was head of cloud services at PJCO Accountants, which is a relatively small accounting practice near Brighton with around 20 staff. During the time that I joined them, I was still training as an accountant, and I was really interested in technology. That was the main interest for me. I wasn't too keen on preparing accounts and tax returns. So they gave me the task of how do we make our processes better for ourselves and also for our clients. So I was tasked with managing the conversions of pretty much all of our clients from mostly spreadsheet based accounting to cloud accounting solutions. And this was at the time really when cloud accounting was just getting started. So QuickBooks Online was the chosen platform that we used, but and this is really for small to medium-sized businesses, and I also looked at, how can we start integrating different apps in to support better financial processes for the clients. that went pretty well. In 2018, QuickBooks recognised us as their UK best firm for the work that we'd done in bringing lots of clients onto the cloud. And then around a year later, I was asked to join a new organisation called App Advisory Plus. And really, the aim of App Advisory Plus is to help accountants to be able to provide technology advice to their clients in a way that's profitable to them. And that's a key word because at the moment, this is kind of quite a new space for accountants to be in, particularly smaller accountants like PGACO, where I was at. The larger accountancy practices, they have these consultancy divisions, and they've actually been trying to move into the smaller business client space recently, not that successfully. But because of their role as an accountant, as often the only professional advisor that a business will talk to in a year, they're well placed as that trusted person to be able to ask questions to, and more accountants are getting asked questions about technology, and of course that is really a question about process, and accountants aren't very well set up to be able to deliver that kind of advice. So there's various elements to the service. We've got a place that people can go and search for apps, but also the key part of it is them being able to ask us questions around, you know, what do I do for this client in this situation? And we can guide them through the stages that we would go through. And they can also ask us to provide that service for their client on their behalf if they want to.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Rowan. I'm going to come back to you on the accountants and lawyers point in a bit, but just to come back to this slide and pick up on some of the themes that Craig touched on, I find this slide fascinating. Lots of different things jump out at me, not least it's a great growth opportunity. You know, I'm one of the people who sort of believe that there's something about this age which allows small companies to grow into big ones much quicker than they used to be able to do. And I'm not always sure I know why that's the case, but equally, you know, number one requirement is help with processes, and yet only 28% have access consulting and advisory. Lucy, is the consultancy profession failing SMEs? What's your take on this? How do you, what jumps out of this slide for you?
A couple of things here. I think I don't know about everybody else, but I feel inundated by the approaches that I get from people who think they can teach me how to grow my business, teach me how to run my business better, and all that sort of stuff. I must get 20 or 30 approaches a week on LinkedIn, and it drives me crazy. I personally have engaged with growth groups. So I did strategic coach a couple of years ago. I had a dalliance with action coach, and more recently I've spoken to a guy called Dominic Monkhouse that helped grow Rackspace to 30 million before it was sold. So I personally can see a lot of the benefits of engaging the consultants, but it's quite a frightening price when you're a small company. And if you're not paying yourself a great deal of money, you know, those of us who've been in the corporate environment and were lucky enough certainly in the 90s and maybe even in the early noughties to be earning six-figure salaries or just below that figure, I don't think many small business owners pay themselves anywhere near that amount. So to be paying £1,000 a day and more for a consultant is quite a frightening thought. And I also don't think a huge number of the small businesses that I come across are great at thinking strategically. But I definitely think it's true that they are reluctant to take on external consultant advice, other than, you know, what laptop should I buy kind of thing, or which software do you think is the best? But I think the strategic piece is very difficult. One figure that's missing from what Craig put up there, although Craig put up that there are something like 5.8 million SMEs with 250 or less people. Actually, because I did my own research on this after doing the Goldman Sachs program, the huge proportion of those are actually less than 10 employees with turnovers of significantly less than £1 million a year. You know, most of them probably don't even make 6 figures.
Okay, so I'm going to lob a question in that's come straight from Sam Courtney, straight on the point you just made about rates, since it's here, which is, I mean, Sam's point is that you have to adjust your billing rates for small businesses, period. But I'd sort of add, or do you have to find ways of delivering value up front that later on turns into a revenue stream? So do you think more about how you sell what you do? Is it more of a service than an advisory?
What's the difference between service and advisory? Surely advisory is a service.
I guess it comes down to whether you bill people by time, or whether you perhaps provide a service over time that involves some elements of retainer and that type of thing.
So certainly we do with the smaller businesses, we do fixed price packages because people need to be able to budget and know what they're getting. So we certainly do that, fixed deliverable, fixed scope. And in fact, that's how we got involved with the Skore team in the first place, I believe.
Okay, very good.
And some of the other people that they put us onto. So
excellent. Okay, so let's just come back, and I'll point this one to Rowan. Let's just come back and just focus on what SMEs actually need in this environment, and then we'll perhaps come back to talk more about how we can help them. What is it that they need? I mean, one of the questions we're going to come to is that it's not just the software, it's the implementation and that type of thing that can be the issue. What is it that SMEs, would you sort of put your finger on, that they lack? I mean, you've talked, Lucy, about limited bandwidth and so on and so forth. So is it the right expertise? Is it understanding the problem in the first place? Or are they quite good at that, and then actually it's the implementation that sort of, where do things go wrong when they go wrong, Ron?
I think it's different for different businesses. I don't think there's necessarily one thing that's the same across all of them. I think some people have difficulty like putting their finger on where the problem is, because I don't know, there's multiple people involved in a process and they don't have visibility over it. Some people have problems sort of problem solving. They don't have problem solving skills, and they just need people to ask the right questions and ease that out of them. I don't think some people like have an idea of how to manage change very well, so need support with that. So I think there's lots of different things to consider, and it's hard as a small business owner. Often the person that is the main person that's going to be driving this, or they might have someone else to help them to have all of that knowledge and skill.
Okay, thank you. And just moving on from what sort of they're lacking perhaps, and back to that question about implementation. One of the things we hear consultants talk about for a long time, I remember the KPMG adverts 10 years ago about cutting through complexity, when often we think the consultant's job is actually sometimes to create complexity, but let's hope not. I mean, in this age of the cloud, is one of the things that's really changing, that we are getting the tools now to cut through complexity, and such that, a successful implementation has always required, for example, a good understanding of process mapping and so on. Craig, back to you. What's different about this era? I mean, it's always been the case that implementing software has been a challenge for all sorts of reasons, but is there something different about this era?
I think one of the key things that's different that I touched on before was about things like ease of use and accessibility of software, right? In the bad old days, a software implementation was something that was done to the organization, right? The people most affected and impacted by that technology were often the ones that had the very least say in how it happened. Nowadays, of course, one of the things that the cloud has given us is this ability to go and try a piece of software and go, actually, I don't like that. It doesn't work for me. So I'm going to drop that and I'm going to go and subscribe to something else. And I know from my experience working in larger enterprises, going back 10 years, what you'd often see is that, okay, you'd have the company agreed system in place, but you'd have people off using kind of something else under the radar that IT don't know about. And that presents all sorts of problems, because you've got then data privacy and security issues with that happening. So companies really had to kind of take that on board and say, actually, we need to make sure that our users, our employees, actually get a software that gives them a good experience. And unfortunately, systems like Oracle and Siebel they're not pleasurable to use, and as SAP has been in the past, and so on. So I think that's one of the big changes. It's almost like the way we talk about customer always comes first, and I think in the last couple of decades the employee has become much more important to many businesses.
Craig, I'd like to add to that. I think the thing is that there's so much for people to choose from, and people are so confused about what is on offer, right down to the point of what's the difference between CRM and marketing automation, for example. Some people just simply don't understand that. And I think the fact that you can try before you buy, and most of these products these days are sold at something like 30 to 60, 70 pounds a month, also creates a demand for a lower price. People think that because it's 35 quid a month, that the implementation cost should be like 50 quid, or something along those lines. And I think that the secondary issue there is that because we're now all working from home when we're making these choices and so on, and you're working on the cloud, the competition for the people who are UK based, who are seeking to act as advisors or consultants or mentors, is that you are now competing with people around the world, because we're all working from home, and we've all got so used to doing meetings like this instead of in person on an evening after a day in the office. Is my competitor now is not another Zoho partner somewhere else in the UK or another CRM systems provider. It's somebody in India, it's somebody in the Philippines, it's somebody in Mexico, it's somebody in South Africa, actually, especially when you're selling to small businesses who are very price sensitive.
Okay. And Lucy, interesting, the point you make there about where the competition comes from, but is the other side of that coin that you equally have new markets open up to that you can serve, which you couldn't?
Yeah, but then how do you keep your value up, Angus? I get about 40 leads a week from India, because we have a small operation in India, and we have an Indian address up on our partner page. But there's no way I want to sell into India at the rates that most Indian businesses are prepared to pay. However, you're right, at the moment, especially with the weak pound, I'm getting great business from the States. Where I can charge $200 an hour, because that's the going rate in America. So all I have to do is bring it down by $50 an hour, and I'm fine.
Okay. So I'm going to bring the conversation back to something that Rowan said, really in order to open up the conversation about skills, but perhaps just start with accountants and lawyers. Rowan, you quite rightly made the point that they're trusted advisors to many businesses, and therefore are constantly being asked to, in effect, advise on things they really don't understand, but they probably could, and we know many are trying to. So yeah, what's your view on how that's evolving, and what skills are they? Why can't they do that well, or will they never be able to do it well?
One of the reasons they can't do it well at the moment, or most of them can't do it well, is because they don't have a process to go through of actually providing the advice, and what happens is it gets blurred in with the other advice that they're providing, because they haven't scoped it properly and separated it from the other services that they're providing. And then what happens is, a lot of people really want to help their clients, so they try and do it, and they're not getting paid for it, which means that they inevitably can't do it as well as they need to be able to. And it's just kind of a mishmash of advice, and that it's rushed. So really what we're trying to do is help provide them with, here's how you should approach it, and that these are some tools to help you to actually be able to provide the advice. But there's certainly something that they can do, because generally I think this is problem solving, and accountants are quite good at problem solving. Is
it possibly, okay, go on, Lucy, and then I'm going to ask my question.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask Rowan a question there, because lawyers and accountants aren't exactly renowned themselves for being the early adopters of new technology. I've been on Xero since I founded the business in 2010, but we constantly get people approaching us for accountants who can help them with their cloud accounting package of choice. And I know it's getting better in the last 18 months, but prior to that, I still found a very high proportion of accountants with 20 or less staff being prepared to adopt cloud accounting. They were all stuck on Iris or Sage or something like that.
Yeah, I think we're in terms of what we're trying to do, it's very new for the industry, for the segment that we're working at trying to help. Yeah, there's not a lot of people that have kind of managed to do this in their own firm, and just getting clients onto Xero and QuickBooks and getting them using it efficiently before we can start looking at, you know, this is an operational type advisory service that you can offer outside of just getting financial processes streamlined for your clients. So yeah, there's a lot of work still to do in helping accountants be able to do it.
I heard an interesting quote from a finance director a few weeks ago. He said that the problem with Xero is I now have no visibility over what's happening in the business.
What?
and you know, digging into that statement, it was, well, before Xero, I had all these spreadsheets, and every time anyone raised an invoice or billed something, it went through my spreadsheets and I could see what was going on. Then someone comes in and implements this Xero thing, and now I've got no idea. And those of us who've used the platform know it should be way better at doing that.
Yeah.
But obviously, so it's just been switched on. They haven't gone through all of those, you know, understanding the processes, managing the change in that business. And I just wonder how many other businesses that's the same situation. The accountant has come in and said, yes, you need to use Xero because making tax digital, you need to file online, switch it on, but haven't been through that process of helping them make sure that it's been implemented right and is delivering what the business needs.
We did a webinar recently with a software provider that have really nailed the implementation side of it. And one of the key things to draw out of that was actually accountants and advisors could look at what software companies do really well about in their implementation sort of setups that they've got. And learn from those processes of how you actually do it was a key thing that we drew out from that.
And once you've implemented software such as Xero and so on and so forth, one of the things that Craig touched on earlier is how post-implementation processes and systems can diverge, often because people don't get in a way, understand the people angle. You know, people will find workarounds when things don't work and that type of thing. And I also wonder whether, you know, in the accountancy and legal profession, you don't find the sort of skill sets that you need to actually understand that, you know, it's not just a sort of numbers game or whatever it might be that an accountant might view it through. But actually there's just a whole bunch of skills there which, you know, need to be found elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at the numbers, there's always a story behind them. And it's being able to talk about what that story is almost, of why that number is what it is, actually be able to, you know, unpick a process that's led to that number being what it is. And I think accountants need a lot of soft skills, and what just generally advisors need soft skills to be able to talk about these things and ask the right questions.
Okay.
Asking the right questions is the big thing. I think Chris has just said something here about pay for proper implementation. And it just made me realize that one of the biggest issues we have with dealing with small businesses, they are incapable of verbalizing what they want and what their requirements are. And that's even before you get to the process mapping stage. They really struggle to say, this is what I want, this is what I'm trying to achieve.
But isn't that really, funnily enough, another Chris was talking to this morning was saying, had been invited in to talk to a client who was in exactly the same situation, and they actually started the meeting by saying, well, we don't really know what we're trying to do, and part of this session is to try and make sense of it. And what you're able to do, whether you call it process mapping or whatever, is you put together a framework around into which you can have a conversation about, okay, what's working and what isn't today, and what are the potential opportunities to do something. I always think it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing. Yeah, it's like, okay, you need to have some sort of idea you want to change something in the business, right? It might be I want to increase profit, or increase revenue, or whatever it is. But beyond that, you really got to start understanding the business to really know where the opportunities are, to be able to improve them. So I'd argue that sometimes you could start doing something like process mapping very much earlier, and still get to the answer you need to.
Just don't tell them you're process mapping.
No, exactly. and that's a good point, because we had a very good I had an experience last week. So here in Hampshire, we've got the Hampshire Chamber of Commerce have been partnered up with University of Portsmouth and the Southampton Solent University, and they've been running a series of webinars which have been quite well attended and very interesting, helping small to medium-sized businesses, get through the pandemic, figure out, challenges, and help them grow. And one last week, the topic was change management, and I went along to listen to the topic, and there were more people presenting than there were attendees, and the information was absolutely brilliant. It was incredibly valuable. But my feedback to the group that put it together afterwards was, what is it? This is obviously a fundamental capability that businesses need to be able to grow effectively, but they obviously don't recognize it as being something that is important to themselves. And that I think is a big challenge, that, like you say, process mapping, people are like, I don't need that.
Craig, thank you very much. We're going to come to sort of gently wrap up this roundtable session. I just wanted to ask the panelists a sort of final word, really. As we look to the future, what does cloud mean for us in the future? Are SMEs going to bounce back quicker in 2021 because of the cloud? Is the future company a company that has everything as a service, such as HR, finance, what have you? So just a sort of last word, if you would please, from each of you as to what you're looking forward to in 2021 and how cloud impacts that. So start with you, Rowan.
Yeah, I think I'm looking towards more projects to help people implement automation in and better processes. Really, I think we're starting to see a little bit more of that pick up at the moment. So I'm hoping that there's going to be some more of that next year.
Okay. Lucy, what's your outlook for 2021?
Well, we've had a phenomenal year, but not because of COVID, but because of steps we put in the year before. And, beginning of lockdown, I employed 18 people. I now employ 29, and I'm still looking to take on more next year. So for me, the big thing is consolidating our offering. So Anna introduced us as the #1 Zoho premium partner. That was last year's tagline. Well, the beginning of this year's tagline. I've already moved on. We've taken on a new platform to the UK called Zupa, getting into field services management, because I think the big thing is, with more people being at home, working from home, and at long last, the acceptance of flexible working, I think services that rely on what I call the last mile, whether it's to the home or to a small regional office or something like that, are actually going to become much more critical than they currently are. And I think that's going to be one of the fastest areas of growth. And the platform we've chosen also allows you to use a load of agencies. So for a while, we've been using the phrase the gig economy type idea. And I think as more and more people are either made redundant from large corporates and set themselves up as coaches or advisors or something along those lines, I think more and more of us are going to be acting as agents and networking in a neural way with lots of different people and getting incomes from lots of different sources. So platforms that enable that way of working and managing your informal delivery network are going to be very important. So
fantastic.
we're investing in that area going forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Craig, last word to you, and then I'm going to pass over to Anna.
I think I'd say that 2020 was like a massive electric shock in the economy for a lot of businesses to adopt new ways of working, whether it's cloud, e-commerce, or as Lucy said, flexible working. That electric shock doesn't come without its problems, right? But at least it's got people going. And I think 2021 is going to be almost a year of consolidation for a lot of those businesses. It's like, we've survived this, we've transformed our business. Now let's really take it places. And I'm maybe overly optimistic that but I believe we'll see a significant productivity jump in the next couple of years as a result of what's happened.
Fantastic. Okay, great stuff. Look, thank you very much to Craig, Lucy and Rowan. Really enjoyed that conversation. Thank you to the participants for your questions. I hope I got to all the questions. I sort of tried to weave them in as we went. If there's any outstanding, the networking session next, I think we'll be encouraging, why not take the opportunity to raise them then. So from me, that's thank you very much, and over to Anna.